Well, welcome back, everyone, to our final two sessions of the 2020 NASAC Annual Conference. Really pleased this afternoon to have, I think, two outstanding sessions to conclude the conference. The first, I think you're going to enjoy. It's entitled How Automating Spend Management Helps States Increase Compliance, Reduce Risk, and Enable a Remote Workforce, a consistent theme that we've had throughout our conference. Our panelists today, we're really fortunate to have with us Karen Carbaugh. Karen is a director with the public sector of SAP Concur. We also have Sherry Schuler. Sherry is accounts payable subject matter expert, also with public sector with SAP Concur. And certainly last but not least, Richard Ekstrom, Controller General, State of South Carolina, and now NASAC's first Vice President. Richard, you're moving right up the ranks. With that, I want to give the first CPE code before we get started. First code, as you can see on your screen, Francis 5, F5. Again, F5. Give everybody just a second to jot that down, and then we will turn it over to our panel. All right, thank you, Kathleen. Karen, I'm going to turn it over to you to start us off. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Kenny. Really appreciate it, and thank you everyone for sticking with. I know it's been a long week of really excellent sessions, and it's Friday afternoon, so hopefully this will be a great session and worth your time this afternoon. So definitely appreciate the time today. So today we're going to talk about how you can increase compliance and reduce risk while also supporting a remote workforce by automating your spend management processes. Let's see here. Let's see, will this work? There we go. I think there's a little lag, sorry about that. Okay, so a senior consultant at a prominent firm recently said that leading organizations will emerge from the current crisis with the motivation to reboot and rebalance. We are finding the statement to be so incredibly accurate as the weeks pass and the pandemic rages on. Before we get started, let's all acknowledge that we know things are never going to be back to business as usual. So how do we take what we've learned, what we've experienced, and incorporate that into our new way of doing business, our new way of responding to community needs, our new way of supporting employee needs, while recognizing that the requirement to maintain control and visibility into statewide employee spend may be a greater need now more than ever. That making decisions on how tax dollars are spent is more critical now more than ever. During the session, our discussion will uncover ways small improvements can result in big changes, both in cost savings and efficiencies for your state. Let's start looking at the role of our state financial leaders. Even before the pandemic, responsibilities for finance leaders serving in public sector organizations has continued to expand. Your work intersects with IT to manage data, HR to attract and retain talent, and managing and keeping up with the rapidly changing travel and expense landscape. With all this, you still have to make sure you have the visibility and control to spend your resources wisely. Making these added responsibilities even more challenging for many public sector agencies is the heavily reliance on manual, paper-based processes, which compounds the challenges around being able to get a holistic view of spend, because paper-based processes, as we know, are inherently error-prone and difficult to integrate. Not to mention, these processes can drain the excitement and passion out of employees who are bogged down with manual, mundane tasks. In normal circumstances, many organizations have the commitment of solving these challenges as part of a long-term roadmap or strategic vision, and that's really in the best of cases. Other, and probably most organizations, have created a patchwork of systems and processes that work in silos across state agencies without any overarching visibility. Many times what ends up happening is that people are added to temporarily overcome these challenges, but because of other competing priorities, that original stopgap measure ends up being the long-term Band-Aid. However, in March, these challenges were brought to light and were magnified, some in a very public way. Stay-at-home mandates required employees across the country to shift to remote work, businesses shuttered, and government agencies scrambled to develop plans. Some of the top challenges state and local organizations faced were a rise in costs due to unplanned spend related to COVID-19. However, revenues were down as business and sales taxes were significantly lower than planned and projected. Wanted to share a quick story because I think it's relevant. I spoke with recently a county in Central Florida, as you can imagine, is reliant on tourist tax revenue. And this normally steady stream of revenue took a significant hit, and a study was conducted that it will take this county more than 3 years to recover. And this study was done at a point in time in June. So as the pandemic continues, the revenue hit continues as well. Agencies needed to quickly shift to support remote workers. Manual paper-based processes that required staff to walk from one office to another to get a physical signature and deliver a stack of physical documents were no longer feasible with a remote workforce. Many community leaders I work with shared with me that they had to send employees into offices a couple times a week in order to pick up these stacks of paper invoices, or were going to cut checks to ensure that vendors were getting paid. And of course, many of their vendors are local companies who rely on positive cash flow to make payroll. Old, antiquated processes and software systems caused remote workers frustration, making collaboration difficult and lacked necessary security controls. And certainly with an uncertain financial and political landscape, states were looking for guidance and support from a federal level. Fortunately, the first round of CARES Act funding has helped many states with funding to support telework capabilities to enable compliance and keep the business running. Several government entities are utilizing CARES funding to contract for cloud-based technologies to allow the business to continue and to support their workers. Given these challenges, many state leaders are asking themselves and their staff these questions. Are we going to gain visibility into unplanned spend and the new spend categories like those needed to support work from home, but also added costs for cleaning, sanitation, PPE, and other supplies needed to keep our essential workers and community safe? How can we maintain our employees are compliant with current invoice and expense policies? Right now, you have employees that need to expense internet or portions of their mobile phone bills. Many worked with a desktop machine, but now they needed a laptop. Do they get to expense the new headset or office chair? Are existing expense policies aligned with these new needs? Or do they need to process these via a PO or invoice process? And do they even know how to do that? Finally, how are we going to keep employees productive and safe? How will my workforce manage the manual entry of stacks of paper invoices and receipts with all the new demands they have on their time, including for many who are working parents, balancing work productivity with new roles they have to fill at home, such as teaching their kids that are now distance learning? Are there ways to optimize or streamline processes to become more efficient so we can get the same amount done without losing workers? Or for those of us who have had to unfortunately furlough employees, how do we get this done with even less employee know-how? When you're able to consolidate processes and pull spend into one platform, you not only are able to make better decisions, you reduce employee frustration, increase employee efficiency and productivity, reduce unnecessary spend, all the while being more efficient about how tax dollars are spent. As we know, every penny counts now more than ever. Spend management is not just about travel, expenses, or invoicing. It's about embracing a connected ecosystem that incorporates your state's current processes and gives your employees simple and secure access with the tools they want to use. By having a single connected platform, you can pull all these components together to build a complete picture of spend while helping you reduce risk, improve efficiency, and plan better for the future. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Richard, who's going to share with us how his current environment has evolved and how he recognizes there are still areas of improvement. Richard, I think we've got a bit of an attendance check.
I'm coming. Attendance check number 2 for this session is L as in Laura, 8, L8. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kenny, and thank you, Karen. I'm looking forward to spending an enjoyable hour with my long-suffering fellow members of NASAC. And I appreciate all of you who are still with us. I know it's been a long week and lots of other things going on, but I hope that you all have gotten as much from the presentations that we've been so benefited to have as I have, because it's been a great conference, great training. And you know, part of what I've heard is just underscored how far behind we are here in my office. I want to talk a little bit. I'm going to present somewhat of a timeline, and I've got some slides. If who's advancing slides? Okay, this is the timeline, and it's really divided into 3 parts: where we've been, where we currently are, and where we'd like to be. Next slide, if you would. This is probably the picture of where all of us were at one point. Some states have gotten past this point a whole lot faster than others, and I think that presentations that we've gotten here over the last week have underscored that fact. You see the little smiley face that's not smiling, and that's because we really didn't have anything to smile about really in the past until 7 years ago. Fairly recently, South Carolina was a long time STARS user. STARS, many of you all use STARS as well. I believe it was developed by Pete Marwick, was the name of the firm back in the mid 80s, now KPMG. We used it here in South Carolina to consolidate really 80 state agencies. Those state agencies represented about 45,000 workers. So it's a fairly big task. We experienced as years went on, increasing instability in the system. Every now and again, it would crash. It was inflexible. There were things that we wanted to do, we couldn't do. It was very manual in the processes, and one of the real downsides was the paper intensiveness of that STARS system. A lot of paper reports, and we processed paper. Paper was our input, paper was our output, and in storing that, we had to store our input and store our output, and that storage was very costly, and we got very little from it. But one of the biggest problems we had was that the system gave us very poor access to information out in the agencies, those 80 agencies I referred to. And that was because as IT developed through the years, agencies automated on their own schedules, and there wasn't any real coordination. There wasn't any central or shared architecture. And so until recently, STARS was the central processor for the state, but we had to maintain interfaces with 74 separate legacy systems out in those 80 agencies. Some agencies used common legacy systems, and so that was a huge cost for us. It was a huge disadvantage for the state in that it gave us very poor central access to data. That's because agencies had subsystems that we weren't able to reach into, and then agencies were constantly working with reconciling their subsystems to what they saw appearing in STARS in their general ledger account totals. And so, as accountants, we can all recognize how difficult that would be to keep up with all that. Well, next slide, if you would. I mean, not all is gloom, because currently we have our own ERP. It was a system that is based on SAP software. We began the process of transitioning from STARS to our new ERP in 2008. We completed it in 2013. You say, wow, that's pretty long integration period. And it was a long period. And that's because in this business, you never know when you're going to get thrown a curveball. And 2009 and 2010, we really got hit with a curveball. And then that was the Great Recession that occurred, and it affected all of us. Well, it also affected our transition from our old legacy system to an ERP. We finally got it completed though, and it allowed us, as you can see on the slide, to make very significant strides in moving from manual to automated processing. However, we hadn't gotten all we want from it, because the front end processes that are really processes that are driven at the agency level, many of those processes remain more manual than we'd like, and particularly in the area of AP, and that's really what this session is all about. It's focusing on spend management. And so I want to talk about our current processes. Here centrally in my office, we process all those vendor payments for the state, as we process payroll for the state as well. But once agencies provide us data to pay vendors, the support for payments, what they do is fairly manual. What we do is fairly automated. So we recognize that there are significant improvements we can make, but let me just talk a little bit about some of the processes currently in place. The agencies will send their data to us after they've done a number of things to those agencies, one of which is to scan them. And so they take paper invoices, paper receiving documents, paper purchase orders, whatever. The purchase orders are automated, but the automated purchase orders have to be linked to these paper documents. Agencies match these documents. They save the documents in electronic formats, and they then transmit those documents to us. They create PDF files that they send to us. Once we get those documents, and one other major task at the agency level is to key invoices into the system, where the invoices deal with things like which general ledger account needs to be coded, what general ledger account is charged, what grant needs to be charged, what's the source of payment, etc. And that is by and large a manual task out at the agency level. And that's one that we believe that the state overall can make great strides in automating. But now that we have received, that agencies have converted these documents to electronic format, we in my office take over, and we can pretty well process everything from that point on electronically. And that's saved us a lot of time, and it's also provided a lot of efficiency for my staff. Although that efficiency hasn't really been gained out in the agency level. It's provided us, though, it's provided the state a significant benefit in that now all those invoices that we had previously received and stored in my office here are very easily searchable. And we can also retrieve documents with their information with keystrokes. We don't have to dig through boxes or filing cabinets like we used to have in the past. It used to be we'd maintain as many of those documents in my office here as we could, as we had space for, and we would never have space for an entire year. We were moving people out of offices to file documents, which, in those offices, which was a very inefficient approach. So we still have challenges. There are many things, if you'd advance the slide, there are many things that we'd like to do. We realize that even in our office here, for the state as a whole, there are things that we can do to make sure that the discounts aren't missed. And our system really needs to be retooled to capture early payment discounts. All that's going on right now is going on manually and in a very decentralized environment now that COVID has hit. But that's, you know, COVID had the good and the bad. The good was that it really drove us here to rethink how payments ought to be managed statewide. We noticed that immediately after COVID that our volume of payment requests went down rather suddenly and rather significantly. And we started thinking about what impact that was going to have on the economy as a whole. And Karen, you mentioned in your opening remarks that there had to be some concern for paying vendors in a timely manner because those vendors had payrolls that had to be met. Well, we struggled with economic conditions in the general economy of the state, and so one of the things that we committed to doing was to develop reports that reached out into the agencies and broke down payments. We never had to do this in the past because we just kept getting documents in that we'd process as fast as we could, and we had a pretty quick turnaround. But once the volume of business went down, we became concerned, and so we developed reports to identify the number of documents, payment documents, an agency provided us on a daily basis, and both the number of documents and the dollar value of those documents. And so we tracked that information daily, and we recognized that there were significant ups and downs. We went to weekly, and we looked at, you know, we put together charts and that sort of thing, and identified agencies that we then reached out to and asked, why are we not getting payment requests from you? We found out in some instances there was good reason. We found out in other instances it was because of technological limitations, principally around scanning. And so we began to work to cure those issues, which we've done. Now, advance it, if you would, to the last, I think it's the last slide. You know, I realize that many of you have advanced well beyond the point we are right now. I admit that. But I'm also happy that we've made improvements, but we certainly want to achieve more for the very large investment we made in our ERP. This long-term project that we undertook ended up costing us over $120 million, which was a lot of money to us. It's probably not a lot of money to some states, but to us it was an enormous amount. And the crisis that we're facing right now that's taught us to rethink how we're going to deal going forward with additional unexpected interruptions has given us a great opportunity to examine moving some of the front-end processes in the agencies to a more automated environment so that the state could gain efficiencies out there, and while doing that, capturing those efficiencies so that budgeteers can see that there was a real reason for investing additional dollars in trying to gain those efficiencies. Also, as I mentioned earlier, one of our objectives is to capture early payment discounts. It'll also allow agencies and the state overall to monitor purchases more effectively. And in that regard, it will give the state overall an opportunity to earn volume discounts or to negotiate with vendors, major vendors, over pricing offered to all state agencies. And finally, to realize any other benefits. And we've heard about some of those benefits all week long as states have made their presentations and as vendors have explained how they are uniquely equipped to deal with making enhancements for states. And I'd like now to just cut off what I'm saying and turn things over to Sherry Schuler. Sherry is with SAP Concur. She's also a Minneapolis native, and I'm a native of Minnesota as well. So I've never met Sherry, but I feel an immediate bond and look forward to hearing her comments about how her firm can deal with some of the needs that we have, as I've described to you, and to also explain what SAP Concur has to offer any state. Sherry, it's yours.
Richard, thank you so much. There is something to be said for Minnesota nice, right?
Yeah.
My fellow Minnesotan. No, thank you so much for sharing your story. I believe that everybody on the call can probably relate to this. I know that in my experience, really being more of a subject matter expert when it comes to processing accounts payable, your story is one that I hear over and over again every single week. So thank you for sharing this time with us and being so transparent. Karen, next slide. Yeah, let's build this out. I think what's really interesting is this really aligns exactly, Richard, to what you were saying about your intended future state for the state of South Carolina. So thinking about this slide, I want you to know this was a study that was done in 2017 by IOFM. And what it found is they had interviewed 600 financial leaders across organizations of all sizes. And what it found, interestingly enough, not only are data and analytics and transparency important, but the two top priorities and concerns for financial leaders really were about being able to forecast and manage cash flow appropriately in a very efficient manner. And then also being able to fully optimize their accounts payable spend. And you touched on both of those, right? Let's go to the next slide, Karen. And the reason these are priorities and what's driving these priorities is that organizations are faced with these common challenges. And Karen touched on it earlier, but believe it or not, 86% of vendor invoices are still being received by paper. Hard to believe. The picture rings true. It brings a little chuckle to me every time because I've personally, pre-COVID, during my travels, sat in offices with financial leaders, and the stacks of paper are real. Another challenge, right, that's driving these priorities is that it can take over 14 days to process a single invoice. So all of that potential opportunity, Richard, that you talked about, it wouldn't exist necessarily in a process like that. And then 65% of payments are being made still via check. CFOs tell me all the time the reason they do that is it is the way for them in a manual process to be able to manage their cash flow. Now, keep in mind, this study and these challenges were all pre-COVID. I would challenge that these challenges are even more impactful to organizations today because we've moved to a work from home environment. So what is the answer, right? What is the solution and maybe the opportunity? Karen, next slide. And then let's build this out. I think it's just one click. So a single connected spend platform is a best practice. And what it really does is it's very complementary to the investments that organizations have made into their ERP system because it's a front end solution. And what it does is it connects the employee's spend, whether it's on a purchase order or maybe it's a direct spend, to the actual employee. It applies the business rules that the organization has to that spend to ensure it's compliant. And then we eliminate 73% of the manual tasks that your employees in accounts payable are doing today, all while centralizing this. So Richard, to your point about your 80 agencies and how they're all doing kind of their own thing on the front end, this is where a single spend intelligent platform would give you the opportunity to eliminate the manual tasks and paper. And it would also give you a centralized forum for your central accounts payable department, as well as all of the independent agencies. And now you have all of this data that becomes intelligent. So being able to automate the distribution of those reports to the agencies to show them where their highest categories of spend, what are their KPIs around their processing, and show you that transparency to be able to make the best business decisions for the organization. So let's take a look at what we mean and break this down a little bit more. We have to first talk about and think about, if you want to do a quick, Karen, purchase orders, right? In state government, we know that you have a very high volume of pre-authorized spend, right? It's already been done generally, or done on a purchase order, so that request has been approved, pre-authorized. And oftentimes that part is automated, right? It's probably happening in your ERP, just like you said. But when you think about what is the right single connected spend platform for me, you want to make sure that you can bring those purchase orders into this spend system. Because one of the advantages, which we'll talk about in a few steps here, is being able to apply automatically your matching rules to eliminate a lot of the disparate work that gets done in disparate systems by your staff, creating those efficiencies that you're looking for, okay? Next step is to be able to eliminate that paper and really digitize all of those vendor invoices so that you no longer have the paper storage. But during that digitization process, it's look for technologies that are being used, like optical character recognition software and artificial intelligence, because those softwares start to apply intelligence to the data off of that invoice, being able to automatically capture the data field to your general ledger. The other thing is that it's also ensuring that the invoice that's received is actually from an authorized vendor. So we're reducing the risk. And then ensuring that it's not a duplicate. There was a recent Ardent Partners study that was done in early 2019. And what they found is that organizations have an average of a 1.26 duplication rate in their invoice process. And so think about that. What would it mean to your organization if you really were paying 1.2% of your invoices as duplicates? What would that be costing the organization? So technology can trigger that and notify you. So now we're giving you the tools, right? The tools are now being delivered to your accounts payable department to most effectively manage your spend and where that spend needs attention, whether it's riskful spend or non-compliant spend. And then in a single platform, ensuring that you can wrap your business policies around it. So you're looking for additional ways of efficiency. If the purchase order is now brought into this type of platform and the invoice is captured and it can capture a purchase order number off of that invoice, it should be able to apply your matching rules. So if that invoice automatically matches to the purchase order, we can automatically approve that because that's all authorized spend, right? So just eliminating all of the duplication in the process. And then next is now having a very flexible automated workflow. You know, one of the things I hear all the time is we're looking for ways to expedite our processing, and best-in-class technologies afford you that opportunity with automatic approvals and the right tools to put into your employees' hands that not only make it easier for them to approve, but also make it the ability to approve on the go. So being able to approve off of a mobile app. This then affords you an opportunity to approve in, let's say, under 6 days. Once approved, now it's ready to pay. And what we hear often is, payment can be just as challenging to manage as the actual process, right? Because you're managing hundreds of thousands of vendors sometimes, And each vendor has a different method in which they want you to make payment. So one of the themes that we're hearing is some of the biggest opportunity to you today is finding a complementary payment strategy to enhance what you're doing today. And what these strategies afford you is an opportunity to reduce the time to payment, which then gives you the opportunity to start those early payment discount conversations with key vendors, as well as potentially looking at a way to optimize that cash flow and potentially add to what you're doing today a payment strategy of one-time use cards that not only are some of the most secure methods of payment, but they also oftentimes afford you the opportunity to start receiving rebates. So when we think about how government has been impacted in 2020 by this pandemic, looking for additional revenue streams that may not have existed in the past are becoming top of mind as well. And this is one of those ways. And then last but not least, in this single platform, now you have all the analytics. Now you have the data. So Richard, I heard you say that, you're looking, one of the key opportunities would be if you could leverage all of your vendor spend consolidated across all 80 agencies and then go out and negotiate. That data can be very challenging to get to if you're not on a single connected platform. And that's exactly what a best-in-class solution will do. Before I end, I want to leave you with one last slide that I think really does encompass and incorporate what best-in-class organizations within government are doing today. Is they're looking for ways of cash flow optimization. So being able to expedite the processing of the actual invoice by centralizing it. And keep in mind, in work from home and the way that our workforce has changed how they do business every day, because cloud solutions are available from wherever, it actually affords you business continuity no matter where employees are. And then providing that increased visibility then gives you and really uncovers for you all of the data and analytics that show you where you can, better manage, have better vendor negotiations, where there's opportunity for early payment discounts and cost savings, as well as potential strategic payment solutions that are just enhancements to what you're doing today, that might even open up an opportunity for additional revenue streams that didn't exist. So with that, thank you so much. I am at this point going to turn it back over to Kenny, and we really appreciate everyone joining us this afternoon.